The terrifying thing about losing power is discovering how many people only loved your throne. Victoria Hale learned that lesson at exactly 8:43 p.m. The ballroom inside the Langford Grand Hotel glittered like old money and political ambition. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while Manhattan's elite circled the room, pretending not to stare at the woman in the red silk dress. Victoria moved through the crowd like she owned gravity itself. CEOs paused conversations when she walked past. Investors smiled too quickly. Men straightened their jackets before speaking to her. She was used to it. For the last 10 years, Victoria Hale had built one of the most powerful luxury tech companies in America. Magazine covers called her untouchable. Financial networks called her ruthless. Social media called her the Queen of Manhattan. Tonight's charity gala was supposed to strengthen that image even more. Then her phone vibrated. Once, twice, 5 times in a row. Victoria barely glanced at the screen at first. She assumed it was another assistant asking about schedules or another investor begging for 5 minutes of her attention. But the expression on her chief advisor's face changed everything. Pale, frozen, nervous. Victoria slowly took the phone from him. Her reflection stared back at her through the black screen for half a second before the notification loaded. Confidential internal files leaked. Victoria Hale under federal review. Her stomach tightened instantly. Around her, the ballroom noise continued for another few seconds before the giant presentation screen above the stage suddenly flickered. Then every conversation died at once. Financial headlines appeared across the screen in massive white letters. Leaked employee complaints, allegations of corruption, secret offshore accounts, manipulated charity funds. Victoria stood perfectly still beneath the chandelier light, while whispers spread through the ballroom like wildfire. The silence hit harder than yelling ever could. She looked around slowly. Just minutes ago, everyone wanted to stand near her. Now people stepped back without realizing they were doing it. A senator she donated nearly $2 million to suddenly turned away, pretending to answer a phone call. One billionaire investor quietly left through a side exit. Another man who once flew her to St. Tropez for the weekend refused to even meet her eyes. Victoria forced herself to breathe normally. Her fingers tightened around the champagne glass. She could already feel cameras focusing on her face, waiting for weakness, waiting for panic. But Victoria Hale had spent years mastering control. She lifted her chin slightly and started walking toward the private hallway near the ballroom entrance. Every step sounded louder now, every whisper sharper. Then she heard someone behind her say quietly, "She's done." Victoria stopped for half a second but never turned around. The silk fabric of her red dress moved softly against the marble floor as she kept walking. That was when she noticed him. Marcus Reed stood near the far end of the hallway wearing a dark charcoal suit with one hand calmly resting in his pocket. 6'4", broad shoulders, completely still. Unlike everyone else in the room, he wasn't staring at the scandal on his phone. He was watching her, not with pity, not with panic, just observation. Victoria reached the hallway entrance and finally allowed herself one shaky breath. Her chest tightened painfully. The pressure behind her eyes started building fast. She hated that feeling more than anything. Weakness. Marcus walked toward her slowly. Calm. Controlled. The sounds of reporters gathering outside already echoed faintly through the hotel lobby downstairs. Victoria looked at him for the first time all night and asked quietly, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Marcus studied her face for a moment before answering. "Because this is probably the first honest room you've stood in for years." The words hit harder than the scandal itself. Victoria looked away immediately. Somewhere behind them, another phone started ringing. Then another. Then dozens more. Her empire was collapsing in real time. And for some reason, Marcus Reed was the only man in the building who hadn't moved an inch. The elevator ride down to the underground garage felt longer than the last 10 years of Victoria Hale's life. Nobody spoke. The soft jazz music inside the elevator somehow made everything feel worse. Victoria stood with her arms crossed tightly beneath the white coat draped over her red silk dress, while her phone continued vibrating every few seconds. Investors, lawyers, board members, public relations teams. She ignored all of them. Marcus stood beside the elevator door completely still, one hand in his pocket, watching the numbers descend floor by floor. 27, 26, 25. Victoria finally looked at him. You do not have to stay. Marcus did not even turn his head. I know. The answer irritated her more than comfort would have. Most men around Victoria spent their lives trying to sound needed. Marcus never did. The elevator doors opened into the private garage beneath the hotel. Cold concrete. Black luxury vehicles. Security guards whispering into radios. The second Victoria stepped out, 3 executives from her company immediately rushed toward her. Their faces looked panicked. Victoria, the board is demanding an emergency call within the hour. Federal investigators are requesting financial records. One of the charity partners just suspended all affiliations. Victoria closed her eyes for one brief second. Everything was moving too fast. One executive lowered his voice carefully. There is also another problem. Victoria opened her eyes again. What now? The man hesitated. Someone leaked footage from the ballroom. Her jaw tightened instantly. What footage? He handed her a phone. Victoria watched herself standing beneath the chandelier, while headlines exploded across the giant screen behind her. The clip already had millions of views online. Comments flooded the screen faster than she could read them. Fraud. Fake billionaire. Manipulator. Monster. Victoria handed the phone back without expression, but Marcus noticed her fingers trembling slightly before she hid them beneath her coat sleeve. Another black SUV suddenly pulled into the garage. A familiar man stepped out wearing a navy tuxedo and a smile too polished to be sincere. Daniel Mercer. Real estate billionaire. Media favorite. One of the many men who spent years trying to date Victoria publicly. Daniel approached carefully with concern painted across his face. Victoria, thank God I found you. She looked exhausted already. Daniel, not tonight. Listen to me, he continued softly. You need protection right now. The media is going to destroy you. Let me help. Marcus remained silent near the vehicle behind her. Watching, Daniel lowered his voice even further. I can connect you with people who can bury this story before morning. Victoria studied him quietly. Normally, she would have appreciated the offer. Tonight, something felt different. Daniel stepped closer. But we need to move fast before your company loses control of the narrative. There it was. The real motive. Control. Even now. Even here. Victoria slowly looked away from him toward Marcus. The difference between the two men suddenly felt impossible to ignore. Daniel kept trying to rescue her image. Marcus had not once pretended the image mattered. I appreciate the concern, Victoria said coldly, but I will handle my own company. Daniel's smile faded slightly. Victoria, this is bigger than pride. Before she could answer, another notification appeared across every phone in the garage simultaneously. Emergency market alerts. Hale Industries stock had dropped another 18% after hours. One executive cursed under his breath. Another walked away immediately to answer reporters. Daniel stared at Victoria differently now. Less admiration. More calculation. She recognized that look instantly. Opportunists always appeared calm around weakness. Victoria suddenly felt exhausted down to her bones. Marcus finally opened the rear door of the SUV beside him. We should leave. His voice remained calm. Steady. Like the world outside the garage was not collapsing. Victoria looked at him for another second before stepping toward the vehicle. Daniel frowned. You are leaving with him? Marcus said nothing. Victoria paused before entering the SUV and answered quietly. He is the only person here not trying to own something from me. For the first time that night, nobody had a response to that. By midnight, every major news network in America had turned Victoria Hale into a headline. The black SUV moved silently through rain-covered Manhattan streets, while glowing billboards reflected across the windows like broken pieces of another life. Victoria sat in the back seat, staring at her phone without blinking. Every refresh made things worse. Analysts predicting collapse. Former employees giving interviews. Anonymous insiders claiming years of corruption. She could handle criticism. She could handle competition. But betrayal felt different. Personal. Sharp. The driver turned onto Park Avenue while thunder rolled faintly over the city skyline. Marcus sat across from her in silence, calm as ever, reading through printed financial reports beneath the dim interior lighting. Victoria finally spoke without looking up from her phone. My board members are already discussing replacing me. Marcus flipped another page. Of course they are. You say that like it is normal. It is. She slowly lowered the phone into her lap. I built that company from nothing. Marcus looked at her for the first time since they left the hotel. No. You built a machine people depended on financially. That is not the same thing. Victoria frowned slightly. What is that supposed to mean? Marcus leaned back against the leather seat. The second fear entered the room. Loyalty disappeared. That means most of them were never loyal to you. The words settled heavily inside the silence between them. Victoria turned toward the rain-covered window again. Deep down, she already knew he was right. Her entire life had been built around performance. Perfect interviews, perfect appearances, perfect control. Even relationships felt negotiated instead of real. The SUV finally stopped outside her penthouse tower overlooking Central Park. Security guards immediately opened umbrellas while reporters gathered across the street behind barricades. Camera flashes exploded the second Victoria stepped out of the vehicle. Questions hit her from every direction. Victoria, are the leaked files authentic? Did Hale Industries hide offshore accounts? Are federal charges coming? Victoria kept walking without responding, but the flashes kept following her all the way. Into the private lobby. Her heels echoed sharply across polished stone floors while nervous employees avoided eye contact. Even inside her own building, the atmosphere had changed. Fear had entered before she did. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt suffocating. Marcus remained quiet beside her while financial alerts continued appearing across the mirrored elevator walls from business news channels. Hale Industries stock had now dropped 31% after hours. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. 31%. Billions gone in a single evening. The penthouse doors opened directly into darkness. The city lights beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows painted silver reflections across marble floors and expensive furniture. Normally the place felt powerful. Tonight it felt empty. Victoria removed her heels slowly near the entrance before walking deeper into the room without speaking. Marcus followed calmly behind her. Then another notification appeared across her phone screen. Daniel Mercer had just released a public statement distancing himself from Hale Industries entirely. Victoria laughed softly under her breath, but there was no humor in it. Unbelievable. Marcus set the financial reports onto the kitchen counter. No. Predictable. Victoria suddenly turned toward him, frustration finally cracking through her control. Do you enjoy this? Marcus stayed still. Enjoy what? Standing there acting like none of this affects you. He looked at her carefully for several seconds before answering. Panic never solves exposure. Victoria shook her head slowly. You really do not care what people think, do you? Marcus walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. People are emotional. Fear changes them fast. He looked down at the streets glowing beneath the rain. Pressure does not create character. It reveals it. Victoria stared at him quietly after that. Because somewhere between the scandal, the silence, and the collapse of her empire, Marcus Reed had become the only person around her who still sounded completely honest. And somehow that honesty scared her more than the headlines waiting for tomorrow morning. At 2:17 in the morning, Victoria finally broke. Not publicly. Not in front of cameras. Not in front of board members or investors or reporters pretending to care about ethics after spending years worshiping her success. She broke alone in the silence of her own penthouse while Manhattan glowed outside the windows like another universe entirely. The city looked beautiful from 53 floors above Central Park. Cold, distant, untouchable, just like she used to be. Victoria stood barefoot near the kitchen counter, still wearing the same red silk dress from the gala. Her hair had fallen loose around her shoulders. Makeup slightly faded. Exhaustion visible now in ways she could not hide anymore. 3 empty espresso cups sat untouched beside stacks of legal documents and financial reports spread across the marble island. Marcus remained at the opposite side of the room reviewing leaked files with the same calm focus he had maintained all night. Victoria watched him quietly for several seconds before speaking. Do you ever panic? Marcus continued reading. No, that is not normal. It is useful. She let out a frustrated breath and grabbed her phone again. Another disaster waited immediately. Her public relations director had resigned. One luxury brand partnership worth nearly $80 million had been suspended indefinitely. A former executive she personally mentored was now giving anonymous interviews claiming Hale Industries operated through intimidation and manipulation. Victoria suddenly threw the phone onto the marble counter harder than she intended. The sound echoed sharply through the penthouse. Unbelievable. Marcus finally looked up. What? Victoria laughed bitterly. People I built careers for are destroying me on national television. Marcus closed the folder slowly. Then they were waiting for the opportunity. His answer irritated her instantly. Why do you say everything like emotions are irrelevant? Because emotions are temporary. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. My company is collapsing. Marcus stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the rain-covered city. No, your image is collapsing. The distinction hit harder than she expected. Victoria crossed her arms tightly. You really think this is only about image? Marcus turned toward her calmly. You spent years building a world where admiration mattered more than truth. That is not fair. Is it inaccurate? Silence filled the room. Victoria hated that silence because somewhere beneath her anger, she felt something worse. Recognition. Marcus walked closer now, but not close enough to invade her space. Never too close. Never desperate. People trusted your perfection, he continued quietly. Not your humanity. Victoria looked away toward the city lights. Her voice lowered slightly. You think this is my fault? Marcus studied her face carefully before answering. I think you surrounded yourself with people who benefited from your performance. She swallowed hard. And now they are protecting themselves. Victoria suddenly felt tired in a way sleep could never fix. She moved toward the kitchen island slowly before lowering herself into one of the chairs. The expensive penthouse suddenly felt too large, too quiet. I gave everything to that company, she whispered. Marcus remained standing. No, she looked up again. What now? You gave everything to maintaining control. The words landed directly where her defenses were weakest. Victoria looked down at her trembling hands resting against the marble surface. For the first time all night, her composure slipped completely. Not dramatic, not loud, just small cracks spreading through years of pressure. Marcus noticed immediately, but did not rush toward her, did not comfort her, did not offer empty reassurance. He simply placed another file in front of her. Internal transaction reports, board communications, confidential emails. Your chief financial officer has been leaking information for months, he said calmly. Victoria looked up sharply. What? And based on these transfers, he was not working alone. Her heartbeat slowed for one strange second, because suddenly the scandal felt bigger than media attacks and collapsing stock prices. Someone close to her had planned this carefully. Marcus watched her absorb the realization before saying quietly, the people closest to power are usually the first ones, preparing for its collapse. And somewhere deep inside the silence of that penthouse, Victoria realized the worst part was not losing billions. It was realizing she had no idea who around her was real anymore. By 4 a.m, the rain outside had finally stopped, but the silence inside the penthouse somehow felt heavier. Victoria had changed out of her heels hours ago, yet she still wore the same red silk dress like she had forgotten how to move forward from the moment her world collapsed. Manhattan glowed softly beyond the windows, while financial channels continued replaying her humiliation on mute across the television mounted near the kitchen. Every headline looked colder now. Every image of her seemed unfamiliar. Marcus sat at the dining table reviewing documents one file at a time with impossible patience. Victoria watched him from across the room while holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. You have been reading those papers for 3 hours, she said quietly. Marcus did not look up, and every page confirms the same thing, which is, he slid one folder across the table toward her. Your chief financial officer moved money through shell accounts 6 months ago. Victoria frowned immediately and opened the file. Transaction reports, private transfers, internal authorization signatures. Her heartbeat slowed slightly. This cannot be real. Marcus leaned back in his chair calmly. It is real. Elliot worked with me for 8 years. That does not mean he was loyal. Victoria looked down at the documents again, trying to process the numbers. Elliot Turner had helped build Hale Industries from its earliest expansion years. He attended holidays at her estate in Connecticut. He knew her schedules, her habits, even the security structure of the company. And somehow he had been preparing for her downfall the entire time. Victoria suddenly laughed once under her breath. Exhausted. Hollow. Unbelievable. Marcus studied her quietly. No. Familiar. She looked up sharply. What is that supposed to mean? Marcus folded his hands together. People stay close to power for one of 2 reasons: to build with it or to survive off it. Victoria stood and walked toward the windows again. Her reflection stared back at her faintly against the dark glass. For years, she believed success created security. But tonight, every relationship in her life suddenly felt transactional. Every compliment suspicious. Every smile calculated. Her phone buzzed again on the counter. Daniel Mercer. Third call in less than 2 hours. Victoria ignored it immediately. Marcus noticed. You are not answering him anymore. I am tired of people trying to negotiate with my crisis. Marcus nodded once. Good. She crossed her arms tightly. You say that like this is some kind of lesson. Marcus stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen island. Maybe it is. Victoria looked at him with visible frustration. Do you know what everyone is saying about me tonight? Yes. Do you believe any of it? Marcus held her gaze for several seconds before answering. Some of it. The words hit harder than she expected. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. Excuse me. I think you built a company that rewarded image more than honesty. She felt anger rise instantly. You barely know me. I know enough. No, she snapped quietly. You know headlines. Marcus remained calm. Always calm. That calmness irritated her more every hour. Headlines disappear, he said. Patterns do not. Victoria looked away again, breathing carefully through the frustration building inside her chest. Nobody spoke to her this way. Not employees. Not investors. Not men. Especially not men. Most people softened themselves around her power. Marcus never did. He simply stood there, grounded and steady, while every defense she built over the last decade slowly cracked apart. Then Marcus picked up another folder from the table and placed it in front of her. Read the last page. Victoria opened it reluctantly. Her stomach tightened instantly. Internal board communications. Confidential voting discussions. Emergency succession planning. Her own board members had already started discussing replacing her as chief executive officer less than 4 hours after the scandal broke. Victoria stared at the page in silence while the city lights shimmered across the marble floor around them. They think I am finished, she whispered. Marcus watched her carefully before answering. No, she looked up slowly. Then what do they think? His expression never changed. They think you finally became weak enough to remove. The silence after that felt endless. Because for the first time in years, Victoria Hale realized she was no longer standing above the room. She was standing inside it. And everyone around her could feel the difference. At 6:12 in the morning, Manhattan started waking up while Victoria Hale had not slept for a single minute. Pale sunlight slowly pushed through the penthouse windows, washing the marble floors in cold silver light. The city below already moved with its usual rhythm. Black cars, crowded sidewalks, early meetings, coffee shops filling with people discussing markets and headlines. Somewhere down there, millions of strangers were talking about her collapse over breakfast. Victoria stood near the kitchen wearing an oversized white cashmere coat over the same silk dress from the night before. The exhaustion beneath her eyes was impossible to hide now. Marcus sat at the dining table drinking black coffee while scanning financial updates on a tablet. Calm, focused, steady. The contrast between them felt sharper every hour. Victoria looked at him carefully. You have not slept either. Marcus barely glanced up. I sleep when problems become manageable. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Then another notification lit up her phone screen. Emergency board meeting. 8:30 a.m. mandatory attendance. Victoria stared at the message for several seconds before setting the phone face down on the counter. They are going to force me out. Marcus took another sip of coffee. Maybe. Her frustration returned instantly. Do you ever answer anything directly? Direct answers do not change reality. Victoria walked toward the windows again, wrapping the cashmere coat tighter around herself. You really think I should walk into that room while everyone is waiting to destroy me? Marcus stood slowly from the table. Yes. She turned sharply. Why? Because disappearing confirms weakness. Victoria let out a quiet laugh filled with disbelief. You make everything sound simple. Marcus walked toward her with measured steps. It is simple. My company lost billions overnight. Then stop acting surprised that people are afraid. Victoria stared at him in frustration. You know what? I am tired of hearing how this is somehow my fault. Marcus stopped a few feet away from her. I never said it was all your fault. You imply it every time you speak. He remained silent for a moment before answering carefully. You built your identity around control. Now control is gone. The words settled heavily between them. Victoria looked away first. Because once again, part of her hated how accurate he sounded. Her entire adult life had been built on discipline, perfection, image, strategy. She controlled rooms before entering them, controlled interviews before cameras rolled, controlled relationships before emotions became dangerous. But now none of those systems were protecting her anymore. Marcus studied her quietly before continuing. You still think your biggest problem is the scandal? Victoria crossed her arms. What else would it be? You do not know who you are without admiration. Silence filled the penthouse again. Victoria suddenly felt something unfamiliar rising beneath the anger. Not humiliation. Fear. The kind that arrived when somebody looked directly at the truth she spent years avoiding. Her voice lowered slightly. You really do not care about hurting people's feelings, do you? Marcus answered immediately. Truth usually hurts before it helps. Victoria shook her head slowly. Most men around me spend their entire lives trying to impress me. I know. And you never do. Marcus looked directly into her eyes now. Calm as ever. Because admiration is not respect. The sentence hit something deep inside her chest before she could stop it. Victoria turned away immediately, pretending to focus on the city outside. Her heartbeat felt strangely uneven now. Not because of attraction alone. Because Marcus Reed made her feel exposed in ways the media never could. The room suddenly felt smaller despite the massive penthouse around them. Then Marcus walked back toward the dining table and slid a folder across the marble surface. Your board chairman called Elliot Turner at 1:13 this morning. Victoria froze instantly. What? 7-minute conversation. Marcus tapped the file once. Whatever is happening inside Hale Industries is bigger than leaked documents. Victoria slowly walked toward the table again. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. Internal call logs. Private financial movements. Legal consultations. The deeper she looked, the colder she felt. This was coordinated. Planned. Structured weeks before the gala. Marcus watched her absorb the realization before speaking one final time. You are not dealing with panic anymore. Victoria looked up slowly. Then what am I dealing with? Marcus held her gaze steadily. A takeover. The headquarters of Hale Industries had never felt this quiet before. By 8:30 in the morning, the 47th floor boardroom looked less like a business meeting and more like a funeral arranged by wealthy people pretending not to panic. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lower Manhattan, while muted television screens displayed nonstop coverage of Victoria Hale's collapse. Financial analysts debated her future like she was already gone. Employees moved through the hallways outside, speaking in whispers. Victoria stepped out of the private elevator wearing a tailored white suit beneath a long camel coat. Her expression controlled but colder now. The exhaustion in her eyes remained, but something else had changed overnight. The fear was still there. It just no longer owned the entire room. Marcus walked beside her in silence, carrying a thin black folder beneath one arm. The second board members noticed Victoria entering. Conversations stopped immediately. Some avoided eye contact. Others watched her carefully like investors studying a damaged asset. Victoria recognized every face around the table. People she promoted, protected, trusted. Now they looked at her differently, like she had become dangerous to stand beside. Elliot Turner sat near the far end of the table in a navy suit with his hands folded calmly in front of him. Too calm. Victoria noticed it immediately. Marcus noticed it, too. The board chairman cleared his throat awkwardly. Victoria, thank you for coming. She slowly removed her coat and placed it across the back of her chair before sitting down. I was not aware attendance was optional. Nobody smiled. The chairman glanced toward legal counsel before continuing carefully. As you know, the situation surrounding Hale Industries has escalated significantly overnight. Victoria folded her hands together on the table. I read the news. Another board member leaned forward nervously. Federal review speculation is causing investor instability. Several partnerships are reconsidering their relationships with the company. Market confidence is deteriorating by the hour. Victoria listened without interrupting. Marcus remained standing near the windows behind her, silent and observant, while morning sunlight cut across the room. Elliot finally spoke for the first time. We need immediate restructuring if we want to preserve shareholder confidence. Victoria slowly turned her eyes toward him. Interesting choice of words. Elliot maintained perfect composure. This is not personal. Marcus almost smiled at that. Almost. Victoria noticed. No, she said quietly. Of course not. The chairman shifted uncomfortably before sliding a document across the table. The board is considering temporary leadership adjustments until the investigation stabilizes. Temporary. The kind of corporate language designed to sound softer than betrayal. Victoria looked down at the paperwork without touching it. Emergency authority transfer proposals. Interim executive recommendations. Legal positioning. They had prepared everything before she even entered the room. Marcus watched the reactions around the table carefully while Victoria absorbed the realization. Nobody expected her to fight. They expected panic, emotion, desperation. One board member finally leaned forward and lowered his voice sympathetically. Victoria, perhaps stepping back temporarily would help protect your legacy. Legacy. Another carefully chosen word. Victoria slowly lifted her eyes toward him. You think this room is protecting me? Silence answered her. Elliot adjusted his cufflinks. Calmly. The company must survive regardless of public opinion. Marcus finally spoke from across the room. Interesting timing. Every head turned toward him immediately. Elliot frowned slightly. Excuse me. Marcus walked forward slowly and placed the black folder onto the table beside Victoria. Most takeover attempts wait longer before revealing themselves. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Board members exchanged nervous looks. Elliot's expression tightened for the first time all morning. Victoria looked up at Marcus sharply. What are you talking about? Marcus opened the folder calmly. Private transaction records. Call logs. Offshore transfers connected to shell corporations. Every page pointed toward the same thing. Coordination. Planning. Intentional collapse. Elliot stared at the documents without speaking. Marcus looked directly at him. You started moving money 6 months ago. The room fell completely silent. Victoria felt her pulse slow strangely beneath the tension. Because suddenly this was no longer about scandal. It was war. And for the first time since the nightmare began, she realized Marcus Reed had walked into this building already knowing exactly who the enemy was. The silence inside the boardroom changed completely after Marcus placed the evidence on the table. It was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence people make when they realize somebody already knows the truth. Elliot Turner stared at the documents for several long seconds without touching them. Around the table, board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs while legal advisors avoided eye contact entirely. Victoria remained seated at the center of the room, calm on the outside, but inside everything felt sharp and dangerously clear now. Marcus stood beside the windows with his hands relaxed at his sides like he had expected this exact moment from the beginning. Elliot finally leaned back in his chair and forced a small smile. You are making serious accusations. Marcus answered immediately. No, the bank records are. Another silence. Victoria watched Elliot carefully now. For the first time in 8 years, she noticed something beneath his polished corporate calm. Fear. Small. Controlled. But real. The board chairman cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should slow down before drawing conclusions. Marcus looked toward him. You already drew conclusions at 4 this morning when you prepared executive replacement papers before speaking to Victoria. Nobody responded. Victoria slowly turned her attention toward the chairman. You were planning to remove me before this meeting even started. The chairman adjusted his glasses carefully. We were protecting the company. No, Victoria said quietly. You were protecting yourselves. Her voice no longer sounded emotional. That was what unsettled the room the most. She sounded steady now. Clear. The panic from last night had disappeared. Elliot folded his hands together calmly again. Victoria, emotions are understandable right now, but these allegations, do not say my name like you are still loyal to me. The interruption landed cold across the room. Elliot stopped speaking. Marcus watched Victoria carefully without expression. She stood slowly from her chair and walked toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Reporters crowded the streets below the building like shadows gathering around weakness. 24 hours ago, she would have done anything to protect her image from them. Now something inside her felt different. Not healed, not stronger, just awake. You know the interesting thing about betrayal? She said quietly while looking out across the city. It never comes from enemies. Nobody moved. Victoria turned back toward the room slowly. It comes from people who studied your trust long enough to use it. Elliot's composure tightened slightly. Victoria, if you continue making reckless accusations, Marcus interrupted him this time. The offshore transfers were routed through Mercer Capital Holdings. The room froze instantly. Victoria looked toward Marcus sharply. Mercer. Daniel Mercer. Suddenly, everything connected too perfectly to ignore. The carefully timed media leaks. The board pressure. The sudden public distancing. The fake concern in the garage beneath the hotel. Daniel had not been reacting to her collapse. He had been helping create it. Elliot looked genuinely unsettled now. You cannot prove coordination. Marcus stepped closer to the table and placed another document down. Private acquisition proposals. Hale Industries valuation projections after scandal collapse. Silent investor positioning agreements. Every page pointed toward the same objective. Force the stock down. Remove Victoria. Acquire control cheaply afterward. Victoria stared at the papers without blinking. Last night she thought she was watching her empire collapse. Now she realized somebody had designed the collapse carefully from the beginning. One board member whispered quietly, "My God." Marcus looked directly at Elliot. You sold access to people who wanted her company more than they feared destroying her reputation. Elliot finally lost patience. This is business. Victoria slowly lifted her eyes toward him. No, her voice remained calm. This is greed disguised as strategy. The atmosphere inside the room shifted again. Board members no longer looked at Victoria like damaged leadership. They looked at her like the woman who built Hale Industries in the first place. Marcus noticed it immediately. So did she. Power was returning to the room quietly now, but not the old version built on perfection and admiration. Something colder, more grounded, more dangerous. Victoria walked back toward the table and closed the folder in front of Elliot herself. You made one mistake, she said softly. Elliot frowned. What mistake? Victoria glanced briefly toward Marcus before answering. You assumed pressure would make me collapse. The room fell silent again. Because standing there beneath the morning sunlight, Victoria Hale no longer looked like a woman begging to survive her scandal. She looked like someone finally ready to fight back. 3 days later, Victoria Hale walked back into the same world that tried to destroy her, but this time she entered without pretending to be untouchable. The press conference room inside Hale Industries headquarters overflowed with reporters, investors, cameras, and financial analysts waiting to witness either her collapse or her surrender. Television crews lined the walls shoulder to shoulder while headlines flashed across every business network in America. Some predicted bankruptcy. Others predicted prison investigations. Most simply expected humiliation. Victoria stood alone behind the private preparation doors wearing a fitted white silk dress beneath a structured cream-colored coat. Clean lines. No excessive jewelry. No performance. Just quiet control. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror nearby, and for the first time in years, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because she looked weaker, because she looked honest. Marcus stood near the hallway entrance adjusting the cuff of his dark charcoal suit, while security teams moved carefully throughout the building. Victoria looked toward him quietly. If this goes badly, the board will remove me by tonight. Marcus answered without hesitation. Then let them earn it. She almost smiled again. Almost. The strange thing was how calm she felt standing beside him now. Not safe. Stronger. Like his presence forced her to stop hiding behind perfection because he never respected the performance anyway. Outside the doors, reporters continued speaking loudly, while camera flashes lit the frosted glass walls every few seconds. Victoria took a slow breath. 3 days ago I thought my life was over. Marcus looked at her steadily. No. 3 days ago your illusion ended. The words should have irritated her by now. Instead, they grounded her. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly before asking the question that had lived quietly in the back of her mind since the night everything collapsed. Why did you stay? Marcus remained silent for several seconds. Because everybody else left too fast. Victoria looked up slowly. That is your answer? People reveal themselves when pressure arrives. His voice remained calm. I wanted to see who you became after the applause disappeared. The honesty in his answer hit her harder than any compliment ever had. No manipulation. No charm. No attempt to impress her. Just truth. Raw and steady. Victoria suddenly realized something terrifying. Marcus Reed had become the only person around her whose opinion actually mattered now. A staff member. Approached carefully. Ms. Hale, we are ready. Victoria nodded once. The staff member disappeared again. The noise outside the doors intensified immediately. Reporters preparing questions. Analysts whispering predictions. Cameras waiting to capture every expression on her face. 3 days ago, that pressure would have consumed her. Tonight it felt different. Marcus stepped aside from the doorway. Then go handle your company. Victoria looked at him for one final second before walking toward the stage entrance. The doors opened instantly. Flashing lights exploded across the room. Questions fired from every direction. Victoria, did your executives betray the company? Are you resigning? Did Hale Industries commit fraud? Victoria reached the podium calmly and placed both hands against the polished surface. The room slowly quieted. Thousands of people across the country watched live, waiting, judging, hoping to see weakness. Victoria lifted her eyes toward the crowd without fear this time. 3 days ago, she began quietly, I lost control of the narrative surrounding my company. The room became completely silent. What I did not lose, she continued, was the truth. Her voice never shook once. No performance. No fake confidence. Just clarity. Across the back of the room, Marcus stood near the exit watching silently, while reporters listened differently now. Victoria noticed him for only a second, but it was enough. Because for the first time in her life, stability was no longer coming from public approval. It came from knowing at least one person in the room saw her clearly and stayed anyway. And somehow that mattered more than every headline in America.